sunny, for me in Maine, sunny afternoon. I want to welcome everyone who has signed up and is participating today. A shout out to all my adult numeracy network friends that are out there, to all the links trainers, the national trainers that are on this call, to my friends in Maine, because I'm from Maine, you can tell that from my accent, and also my friends from Iowa. I was just out there last week, and they're joining today to learn more about this training. So this is about a training called now First Steps in Preparing for College Math, Parts 1 and 2. For those of you national trainers who had done the old version of this, you're going to see a lot of changes. For state trainers who are just learning about this, this is going to be probably all new to you. So we'll take you through the slides. My hope is that as we quickly go through this webinar that you will become familiar with, the content of it, how to deliver it, and as you can see, there are now 2 parts to this training. And I'm going to be alluding to different features in that, etc., as we go through the slides. Okay, so let me give you some background about this training, because we're going to go a step back in time. In 2003, I was interviewed by the College Transitions Network people, Cynthia Zaft in particular, about what I was doing in my classroom. So for those of you that maybe weren't teaching at that time, things were changing. The GED test had changed in 1988. There was some more algebra, but it wasn't the test that you know today. But still, there was that. And there was also, though, a big outcry that students were going into college and they weren't ready, and they were being put into developmental classes, and they were using up their Pell Grant money, and they were not finishing. And I started doing my own little research on my own to see how my students were doing, and I compared their GED test scores to their AccuPlacer scores, because in Maine they started using the AccuPlacer for college placement, as many of you are aware of the AccuPlacer or the Compass test, and I was finding some big discrepancies. So I knew things had to change, and so I started trying different things in my classroom, and that's where that first training came from. It was based on the interview, which you can find on the National College Transition Network website, called Promising Practices. It's probably one of the first promising practices at that time. And I was charged with coming up with a 3-hour workshop explaining some of the things I did in my classroom. Well, now let's fast forward to where we are today. So much has changed. The Common Core came on. The College and Career Readiness Standards came to be. The test, the GED test now is offered in 3 different formats, the HiSET, the task, and the GED, all that uproar. And so people were flocking to this little 3-hour training thinking they were going to get all their questions answered. And of course, this is not what this training is about, and we needed to do some revisions. And so this is what we've done. Last summer I worked on this. I actually got to pilot it just last week in Iowa, which I'm glad, because I can see how it went. And Brooke Estes, one of our national trainers, did this training in Kansas and in South Dakota, so we could see how it went. And so, as you can see, the old title was Preparing Students, and now we're talking about just those first steps, because it takes a lot of different things to really start to help students become prepared for college. This training itself is designed for any math instructor that is working with adult learners in a variety of programs, those that are working towards their high school equivalency or the high school diploma, or they're in career pathways or bridge programs or college transition programs. And I would even say even an ABE teacher whose students aren't anywhere near that higher level but are still thinking about college, there are things that you can take, particularly from the Part 1 training, to utilize. And I say that because someone in Iowa shared that with me, that she actually picked up some activities that she would do with her ABE learners. So I'm hoping, that you will see how to embed particularly the soft skills, which is another buzzword that's out there, but it's so important, and the math skills into your classroom. And hopefully you'll pick up some strategies. There's so much, and there's just so little time within these 2 trainings, but it is, as I said, the first steps to preparing your students. So what are the revisions to the training? There are many revisions. First, the first one is, and I'm trying to get that it's 2 parts now instead of 1. The old training was a 3-hour workshop. The new training has 2 parts, each of which have about 3 hours embedded in them, and some could even go a little bit longer depending upon your circumstances. And the name has changed. It's changed to quite a lengthy title, but it's First Steps again in Preparing for College-Level Math. And the Part 1 is Using Soft Skills for Success, and Part 2 is the Math Strategies for Success. The Part 2 builds on Part 1, but they can also stand alone. And so I'm going to just say, I hope, particularly to my state trainers that may be taking this back to your states, I hope that you do both parts. I think they're needed. The minute we see the math strategies, that's where we run to, and yet there are some math things discussed in Part 1, and Part 1 is so needed for Part 2. So I'm hoping that people would consider doing both together. Part 1, as I said, focuses on soft skills, and Part 2 focuses on developing more conceptual understanding and application of math skills and strategies that you can use. Both of the parts, though, are going to focus on 21st century skills and employability skills, and that's another shift that we hear wherever we go. And it's really important, and yet we find as we go through this training that many of the things that we do in our math classroom do address these skills, and that's part of what this training is about. So I'm going to first look at Part 1, and as I finish talking about Part 1, if any time a question bubbles up, put it in the chat box. I've got Ben looking at the questions, and as I finish talking about Part 1, if there are any questions, I'll take them then, and then I'll go into Part 2, and then about some strategies overall. So Part 1 is talking about the soft skills, and we did have some of that in the original training, but they were kind of interspersed throughout and really weren't called out. And so in this training Octay looked at it and gave me some suggestions, some really good suggestions of how we could do this. And we start out brainstorming about, what skills do we see that we think our students should have entering college, and then we narrow that list down and we use that as a guide as we go through some of the other documentations like the 21st century skills, like the employability skills. We talk about goal setting and all those important things that are needed, and as I said, this is the foundation for that Part 2 training. So here is a list of the topics, and my national trainers out there who have done the old training. Anything in black is from the old training. Anything in blue is what we've now implemented into the soft skills training. And so I'm going to be talking about some of these more in detail on some slides, but we start off with, discussing what these 21st century skills and employability skills are, where do we see crossover, and we keep all the way through both the first training and the second training, keep alluding back to these so we can see how they are implemented into a math classroom. The barriers, the best of times and worst of times, and the goal setting are all the same ones that we did in the first training, the original training. And some of you that have done this training before are going to say, but the components were in there too. And yes, they were, the components of numeracy, but now we are really looking at that document and seeing how it is embedded in the mathematical practices which came to be after this first training was developed. And we again look at those two, and I'll talk more about that in a future slide. The math anxiety was in the original one, that still is there, but then there's a piece about problem solving. How do we address problem solving? How can we do problem solving different? And that's why I really feel strongly that Part 1 really needs to be utilized, because a lot of what we talk about in Part 1 pops up in the Part 2 math strategies section. What we're going to do now is Ben is going to get us set up to watch a video, because another thing that has come on to the scene is this PAC study. Those of you that have gone to COABE have learned a lot about the PAC study. You might be on a listserv that's been talking about it, or you've seen it through links and what they've been sharing. But PAC is really, again, stressing the need for us to address numeracy issues, because we're not doing too well in numeracy. And so Ben is going to set us up to watch a video. It is going to appear down in the lower right-hand corner. It's going to be small, but at least you can listen to it, because it's a really good video that explains about the PAC program and the findings. So Ben, I'm going to let you take it away.
Okay, I'm going to play the video now, folks, and it's just under 5 minutes, so when it's over, you can click the little tiny X right above where that video is to close that window. And here we go.
we were experimenting with this, and I apologize for how small that video may have appeared. Those of you that have received the materials, this is embedded in the PowerPoint, and you can go to it. You can go to watch this video again in a bit bigger screen. I did like this. I thought it, you know, there in the training there are some slides about PIAC, and there are some graphs, and they're okay. But something about that video, I think, it just captures some of the essence of the study. And what Brooke and I, we've both talked, if you're just, again, doing the part 2 as a standalone, then you want to try to have time to show at least this part of the PIAC study, because in the second part, I talk about the digital literacy piece and the younger students and that impact. So I found that it was relevant. So some of the things in part 1 that I was alluding to, again, was this idea of the 21st century skills and the employability skills. And so what we do for an activity is first we brainstorm, as I said, you know, skills that we feel our students should need to be college ready. And then we pare that list down, and then in groups we look at these 2 documents, and we look at them and see where the commonalities are and where we see it also in what we had generated for our list. It makes those documents a little bit more applicable and useful, instead of one more thing I have to do in my classroom. As we go through, we see that how easy it is to embed some of these skills within the math context. The other thing that we do is we do that same kind of crosswalk with the components of numeracy and the mathematical practices. And when I did this in Iowa, I did it as a jigsaw. I split them up into groups, and each group had a couple of the mathematical practices to look at and the components of numeracy. We talk a little bit about the components before we do, you know, split them into the groups, and then we talk about, you know, where did we see each of those embedded, because the components were a driving force in establishing the mathematical practices. And then we step back and look at those, the 21st century skills and the employability skills, to see all 4 documents working together, so that it's not this, you know, all these things we have to think about. They really are very common. There are many things that weave in through all of them. The other part, part 1 that I like is the problem-solving piece that we start. We talk about teaching through problems instead of having the problems at the end of the textbook, actually opening up with a problem. And this is one that Connie Rivera introduced me to, called open middle problems, which are really opening it up and making students think about what they're doing. And so as a facilitator, you definitely want to try this problem yourself before you go and do this as a presentation. The premise is the participants have the numbers 1 through 9, just the whole numbers 1 through 9. They are to select 4 numbers so that when they place them in this particular equation and they solve for X, they get the largest possible answer for X. There's a second one where they get the smallest possible answer for X. Given the time frame for this, you probably will only have time to do 1, but the discussion was rich. In Iowa, we had some really good discussion about how we did the process. What was the thinking behind it? What mathematical properties came up as you were doing it? What did it have to do with equality? There's so much more than just solving the equation. So hopefully as you're doing this presentation, you do have time so that some participants can share their thinking, or you can have them turn to each other and share their thinking. It's whatever your style is. I just want to say about this part 1 and the soft skills approach, that I went back to the interview that they did with me back in 2003, and in it there was a quote I had, and I think it pertains to what this part 1 is all about, and it's that it's more than just math. Learners need to be good students, meaning they need to learn how to take notes, to be organized, come prepared. They need to know how to work in groups. They have how to network and how to advocate for themselves, including asking clarifying questions. And this was all prior to 21st century skills coming out. So all of those are important things to think about. Before I go on, I think the next slide is part 2. Let me see here. Yeah, before I go into part 2, I just want to stop for a minute and just see if there were any questions. Ben, did any questions pop up? Because I can't see the chat box here, so if there are none, I'll continue going forward.
I guess there was a question, 2 questions. Can a digit be used more than once?
No.
And okay, and
yeah.
That looks like that was answered. And then I assume only positive integers.
Yes, it was just whole. I just said whole numbers. Whole numbers 1 through 9.
Great.
I will tell you in the facilitator's guide there is an answer key, but it's more than just getting the answer. It's how you got to the answer. What were the strategies that you used? What was your thinking? You know, what bubbled up as you did the problem. So yeah, you only use the number once. The numbers 1 through 9. They're whole numbers, no negative numbers, etc. So. All right, if there are no other questions, I'm going to proceed now to part 2, because I know that's where everybody's getting excited for. All right, so part 2 is about the math strategies for success, and so that's where I'm pushing on, you know, thinking conceptually, teaching differently, so that students can become prepared, but I cannot stress enough that that part 1 component builds so much into part 2. So I really like to see them together. All right, so again, for my national trainers who have done this training before, you can see there's a lot of new things added. The only things from the old training that are still there that are very important are the math journals and the Exponent Lab. Everything else is new to this, and I'm going to be talking about each of those. But you can see at the top, there's a review of the 21st century skills and employability skills. In Iowa, I did it at a conference, and so participants had part 1 one day and part 2 the next day. Brooke did it in South Dakota. They did it as a day-long presentation. So again, my concern is if states decide they just want to focus on the math strategies, you've got to embed time to go over the 21st century skills and employability skills. And in the guide, it tells you, you know, what to do. It takes about 30 to 45 minutes, which really doesn't give you much time for other things, but it's so important to have that because within the training we keep going back to see where did these link. One of the first activities that I was a little hesitant to put in, but yet it did come from the Promising Practices interview. It was something I did do in my algebra classes back during those times, was called the clue activity. I'm going to talk more about that in a minute, what that involves, and it has to do with problem solving as well. Also, you see there are critical thinking skills in math, and we address some of those. I'm going to talk about all of those in the next slides, so I'll get into more detail. So the first one is the clue activity. And basically, for you as a facilitator, some things you need to know. You need to have 26 clues cut up and put into envelopes before you begin this activity. Poor Brooke, the first time she did it, she wasn't sent the clues, and so she knew how to contact me, and I got her the clues, and she was off on her merry way. So you need to have, I would say, 4 to 5 packets of these clues cut up. Preferably groups of 4 or 5 are the ideal. So you need, if you're a facilitator, to kind of know, if you can, how many participants are they anticipating coming so that you'll have enough packets. I say that because I would say, you know, I don't know how many years ago it was, I was in Alabama doing the old training, and I was told that there would be probably 30 participants. I had 120, and that can really set you into a tailspin because this particular activity works well in groups of 4 or 5, but bigger groups, if you had less clues, let's say, it doesn't work as well because not everybody will participate. And if you have smaller groups, it takes longer. So I'm hoping that as you do this, that you can at least get together groups of 4 or 5. And the premise of this is just like the old clue game. You've got to figure out who the murderer is, what was the time of the murder, what was the motive. from the clues. And so it's a great activity, and it really gets back at, so what is problem solving? I think the essence of this is not just that you solve the mystery, but you talk about, where did you see maybe some of the 21st century skills utilized in this, or the employability skills, or some of the math practices. Where did you see it in this activity? It's a favorite of mine. My students loved this activity. I will say when I did it with students, it took much longer. And my fear was that I have an hour allotted to solving the mystery and discussing it, and I wasn't sure if that was enough time. It worked well in Iowa. Brooke told me it worked well in South Dakota, so I'm thinking that the timing of that is pretty good for you as you try this activity. But again, you want to try it too yourself. Another one is the Exponent Lab, which is from the old training, so those of you that have done that one before. And Dorothea had asked, should we have any handouts, or should we have anything in front of us? I didn't realize that you had this already given to you, but the Exponent Lab handout is one, if you've got it available, you could look at it now. This activity requires, at first, no calculating, just your gut feeling. I take participants, I break them up into pairs, and I ask them to just circle what they think is the larger value. For example, there might be one, which is larger, 8 to the 9th or 9 to the 8th, and there's some with negative exponents, and there's some with 0 exponents. If you are presenting to people who have some pretty good background in mathematics and they already know the answer, then have them think as their students. How do they think their students would answer the particular questions? Once they've made their guesses, then they can utilize a calculator to come up with their answers. So here's another caveat. Everybody needs a scientific calculator. Now, in the past, in the old training, we had calculators that we could utilize, and we found those, and Kate Beal now has them at the link site if you need them. They aren't the TI-30XX calculators, because these are the calculators I used back in 2003. They're good calculators. They're sharp calculators. They do have scrolling screens, etc. But what I'm finding now is everybody has a smartphone, and all smartphones have scientific calculators embedded in them, and that's what we used in Iowa. If you have an iPhone, all you have to do is set it on its side, and it immediately becomes a scientific calculator. Some of the Android phones are a little more complicated, and some are, some aren't. And so it's your call as a facilitator to decide how you want to do this. If you're doing it at a school site, you might tell the participants ahead of time to bring their own scientific calculators. For you as the facilitator, you need to be you need to know all the different ways, all the different power keys that might be out there. Those are explained in the facilitator guide, but there's an X to the Y key, or there's a Y to the X key, or there's a caret key. There are many different ways. The other thing is they could utilize the internet to pull down a scientific calculator if Wi-Fi is present where you are giving the training. What I like about this activity, though, is not just the guessing and then comparing. It's the next part that really digs deeper, and that is that the participants have to come up with 5 conjectures or 5 statements about exponents that they observed from this activity. And that's where it starts getting at some of those exponent rules. Rather than my giving them the rule, they're coming up with it, or the student's coming up with it. And some of the rules need to be tested, because inevitably you're going to get one that says any base raised to the 0 power is 1, and that one you'll need to explore. And I'm not going to give away any answers yet. You can try it out for yourself, and the answers are in the facilitator guide. But it's good discussion. The cake problem is a new one for all of you, even the national trainers. The cake problem is one that I used in many of my trainings as I've gone around the country. And I got it from a series of warm-up exercises for math Olympians. It was for middle school kids who were trying out for the Math Olympics, and I really liked these, and I used them in my algebra class for discussion, and the cake problem is a great one, and even more so now, because the cake problem wants you to visualize. Now, a lot of people are going to plow through that problem and not visualize, and they may come up with an answer that's not correct. And now with Joe Bowler's work and the cognitive science work on how students are learning math, they're finding that visualization is very important. So this cake problem even takes on greater meaning. What happens is, as you do the problem, as you break participants up into groups and they work on it, or however you decide to do it, you're going to come up with a variety of ways of solving the problem. And it's all explained in the facilitator guide. It would be nice if you happen to have some square tiles to put at tables. If not, that's okay. They can draw it out, graph paper. Make sure you have some graph paper then, so they could try to draw the problem out if they choose to do that. Some won't, and it will be interesting to see. What happens is some think of it in a proportional sense in terms of just the measurement of the cake. The problem states I have an 8 by 8 square cake that serves 4 people, and how many people can I serve if I have a 12 by 12 cake? How many cakes do I have to order for 27 people, I think it is. So anyhow, some people will work with just the edge of the cake instead of thinking of the area of the piece of the cake. So it gets into lots of good discussion. And we had enough time in Iowa to do this problem and to really discuss it. And what gives the richness to this problem is in the discussion, is in sharing the different ways to solve it. Other things that I introduce in this training are ideas of I notice and I wonder. If any of you were at COABE at the Adult Numeracy Network's pre-conference, we did a lot with I notice and I wonder there, where we try to notice the math that's being involved and then wondering about other things. And so I'm using I notice and I wonder with a straight out of the algebra textbook word problem, one of those not so fun word problems, but we use it to say, what do you notice about this problem? And then what do you wonder about this problem? And in Iowa, we had some really good I wonder questions. The I wonder questions get students thinking in all different directions, just not in that problem itself, and doing more inquiry-based thinking. The other thing that I allude to is abstracting. And abstracting is very easy to utilize in any math class or in any class in general. It's more getting at critical thinking skills. For example, I did this one time with a group of teen moms who wanted to take a smoking break. And we had just finished discussing photosynthesis. And so I said, name an object in the room. And so they said, table. And I said, okay, I want you to tell me 4 things about the table that are like photosynthesis. And so it gets them thinking about some object that has nothing to do, but tries to make connections. And one was that I still remember to this day was, there's a table in the smoke room. I'm about to take my smoke break. Smoking produces carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is used in photosynthesis. So, again, it got this, it told me as a teacher, they began to understand that process of photosynthesis, and it got them to dig deeper. In this activity, in the training, I asked participants to tell me how is the quadratic formula like a tree. And then we get into, different things like some said, oh, a tree has roots, and this equation finds the roots of an equation, blah, blah, blah. And the tree is shaped like a parabola, and if I graph this, it may give me the shape of a parabola. And, your mind goes in all different directions, but it really gets you thinking deeply about what the topic is. And then the piece that I didn't like as well, I think I would do it differently next time, but it's such an important piece, and that is teaching with questions, questioning in the math classroom. And questioning in the math classroom can be a whole workshop in itself. So, giving it only, 15, 20 minutes is not giving it service. What I did was I handed out a questioning sheet that comes from the PBS website. It's called Developing Mathematical Thinking with Effective Questions. They are really good questions. And what I wished I had done, and I would do if I did this training again, was maybe do this as a jigsaw as well, and give each group one set of those questions, and have them go back to the cake problem and think about the erroneous student, the one that didn't think deeply enough about the problem or did it in an incorrect way. How could you get them thinking, or how could you help them? Or think about students who struggle in math, because this has to do with struggling with math problems. How can we guide them? How can we get them to think more deeply? And so I think I would have gotten more bang for my buck if I had done that and had each group look at a set of questions and think about, what would they pull out of that? What question might help them, and share out. We were short for time, and that's the part, particularly if you have to front load some more of the 21st century skill piece, that shortchanges this, and this is a rich piece. So I'm throwing that out as a suggestion. However, there is a video. I'm not going to show the video, but there is a video that is embedded in this training. It's Steve Hines. Some of you may know Steve Hines. He teaches out of Chicago. He used to be with the CUNY program in New York, CUNY, City University of New York. And he has a video, great video, on how he does questioning in the classroom. And I did feel that did help my people in Iowa, as we watched that, get some ideas about how to question students in the classroom. So if you are short for time, definitely show the video. I think the video is worth it, and does bring up some good discussion. All right, so before I go into this next part, are there questions about part 2? Did any questions come up in the chat box, Ben? And if not, I will continue on. I can't see the chat box. Okay,
yeah, I didn't see any new questions. Yeah.
Okay, fine. I'm just going to keep moving ahead then. If any questions come up, it's going, I'm moving quite quickly through this, please do put them in the chat box. So how do you as a facilitator prepare for this training? There's a lot of background knowledge that you need as you do this, and two publications that are worth reading are this publication called Education for Life and Work. This can be found on the links resource collections. It's a really good document, and has a section on deeper learning that I really liked reading about. And then visit the Employability Skills Framework website for some more in-depth knowledge of that. And also, Amy Vickers gave a nice webinar on the employability skills, particularly on the effective relationships within that. That's going to be housed on the Links YouTube channel. It's not there yet. Both that and this particular webinar will be there. I had to miss Amy's because I was flying to Iowa, and I'm anxious to listen to hers, but she and I each chatted about it, and I'm thinking that much of what she talked about would help, particularly with the part 1 part of the training. Some other things to be mindful of as a facilitator are there are a lot of copies with this particular training. There are like 8 handouts, I think, for part 1, and there are 9 handouts for part 2, and you combine it with how many participants are coming. That's a lot of copies for you yourself to have to carry with you. So check with where you're facilitating. See if they're willing to make the copies for you. If you have to make the copies, Links will reimburse you, but it just depends on your logistics. If you're a state trainer, you might have access to a photocopier within your site to do that. For the clue activity, as I told you before, you need to have packets of clues available ahead of time, ready to go. At least 4 sets or more, depending upon how many people you're presenting with. You need to try the activities yourself before you present them to the audience, because you need to yourself be aware of, where did you stumble, or what did you have questions about, or what came up when you tried some of these activities. And in particular, the open middle problem and the cake problem are 2 that you definitely want to try yourself. And of course, as I said before, the technology piece, you need to be familiar with a scientific calculator, particularly the power key on the scientific calculator. And also you need to know where you're presenting. Do they have Wi-Fi? Because you're going to have a Wi-Fi connection to show that PIAC video or the Steve Hines video. And if you're going to be showing the video, you also need to have a sound system. I happen to have purchased my own stereo system, my own speakers, but some of you may not have that, and so you need to ask and inquire where you're presenting. Is there a sound system? Is there a speaker system? Because if not, then that's going to impact the training. You won't be able to show the PIAC video, and you won't be able to show Steve Hines' video, and therefore you'll have to, that might allow you more time for the effective questions, but I found those videos were it was just a nice mix in the presentation. The other thing is to plan your time out. As I said, I was really concerned about the timing. It's hard to write a training without giving it, so I was glad. I was very thankful that I was able to go out to Iowa and kind of try this out before talking to you about it. I usually make up a little chart as showing the time that I should be starting this particular training, how long that training is, and what time I should be ending, so that I can kind of be mindful of where I need to, speed up or lengthen, or if I'm taking more time for something, how am I going to fix that for other things that are coming? You constantly have that on your mind. The facilitator guide gives you some suggestions there. The other thing is where you're giving the presentation. If it's in a conference setting, there are, like for instance, I'll use Iowa as my example. There was a break built in, but I knew of that ahead of time so that I could kind of time out the training to see where I would make my break as they went out. But also to be mindful, if there's a break at a conference, sometimes people don't come back or new people come in. And so you've got to compensate for that. And sometimes there's a lunch break between. So again, be mindful of where you're doing this and where the breaks have already been established so that you can set the timing for yours. And also, if you're just doing part 2 as a standalone, you've got to also be aware of timing because you're going to have to add in that extra piece. And this is for state trainers that might be on this call who may have never done a training. The national trainers, we had to be vetted, and we had certain criteria that we had to meet. And state trainers, that's not necessarily so. So my call out to state trainers is that I'm hoping that whoever you've selected for your state trainers does have some math background, of course. It would be nice if they had A&I training for the philosophy about teaching differently. But if not, I would say for some state trainers that are feeling maybe a little bit nervous about doing this is to link up with someone in your state who has done trainings before. If they've done some trainings in math, maybe you do it as a pair, or you pair up with someone, just do it as a paired training, feeding off each other. I like doing trainings with another person because we feed off each other, we add insight, we might see something that they've missed and we add it in, we critique each other at the end, so it's always a good thing to think about. And of course I've been saying, encouraging you to think about doing this entire training. To me, it is much more worthwhile if participants have both parts 1 and part 2. And then back to the state trainers, I would hope that whoever you select for your state trainers are knowledgeable of the career and college readiness that standards, particularly about the shifts, which are now called the advances, about rigor and conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, that they understand those pieces and making connections, all those pieces that are in the advances. And then also that they are teachers that are familiar with teaching math conceptually, because this is really the premise upon which this training was developed. And the other thing that is embedded into the training, and I used to do this anyhow, even when I did the old training, was to familiarize your participants with links, because links is a valuable resource. It's a free resource, and yet I'm amazed when I go around the country about how many people aren't familiar with links. I'm finding that less now, but this was back when I first was doing this training. I'll go back to Alabama. Of the 120 people that were there, and I asked how many are familiar with links, there was just a handful. And I thought, gee, that's sad because there's so many resources there. So when I did this in Iowa in the Part 1 training, I did not do it as much in Part 2, but in Part 1, I actually went on to the website to show them the community of learners and showed them a particular discussion that we had on some algebra topic. And the learning portal, I quickly showed, some of the courses there. But then the resource collection, I did go into that because I really think the resource collection has improved in terms of how to search for topics. And so all I did was I typed in the word algebra and up-pulled all these wonderful resources, of which Joe Bowler's work was right at the top, and the article about my promising practices from the NCTN, the one about the one the training is on, was there, and Linda's and Myrna's work on algebraic thinking, another good one, components of numeracy, came up, so that you could show them that these are places where participants can go to get these articles. Links would like to encourage people to sign up then. I ran out of time, but if you can, maybe as they come in, have them go on. Again, you have to have Wi-Fi access to do that, to join the Links community. And so that is my piece now about this training. And so I just wanted to open it up if there are anybody that has questions before we close for today. Any questions at all about the training, how you're going to implement it, I can gladly answer those now. So
there was a couple of questions in the chat, Pam. One was the facilitator's manual said that there was an evaluation document for participants in the handouts, but that evaluation document was not among the docs that were sent out.
Okay,
where was that document? Oh, okay.
And so it may, it may be when you. This might be a Jesse question. I know when I went to Iowa, there's also sign-in sheets that we're required to do as Links national trainers, so that they can receive newsletters from Links. So, and that wasn't provided in the training. And the
yeah, I can answer.
Go ahead, Jesse. Would you take that?
Yeah. So yes, if you are providing this training through the Links Professional Development Center as a national trainer, you would also receive the Links Customer Satisfaction Survey. That's sent out specific to a training if you're doing it through the Links PD Center. So that was not included in those documents because they're not strictly training materials.
Okay, so the state trainers who do this are doing it more in their states, and Links doesn't need to have the surveys. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. All right. And any other questions, men?
Then there was just a quick one. I'm not exactly sure when it happened, but Rebecca Strum asked, are there suggested answer keys to the different activity pages?
Yes, there are answer keys in the facilitator guide, and Rebecca, if they're not, you know how to get a hold of me. But no, there are answer keys in the facilitator guide for the particular activities. All right. Any other questions? Well, I thank you all for coming today and listening, and wish you well as for my Links National trainers, if you get a call to go out and do one. I think the best model would be for a state to have a Links National trainer come out to kick it off, and then the state trainers can then kind of bring it throughout the state. That's what Iowa did. That's what South Dakota did. I think that's a nice model. The state trainers can then see it in action, see how it works out before they go and do it on their own. That's just a suggestion. There is a link survey that you will need to fill out. Is that a direct link on this slide, Ben, or do we have to put it in the chat box?
No, I already threw that in the chat.
Okay, very good.
The survey gives them a link there. You can click that directly, and I'll send a follow-up email as well.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody, for taking time out of your day to listen. I wish you well. And we were going to put my email address, weren't we, Jesse? or something to contact me. Most of you on there are my friends. You know how to contact me, but a lot of you that don't know me, if you need to get in touch with me about a particular question on the training, I'll be happy to answer it. And then if you want to put my email address in the chat box, I'm fine with it.
Sure.
And good luck. Oh, there's a contact. Okay.
Okay.
Great.
Okay.
All right. So I think we are done. And please, excited to look further at this training. Yes, Sandra. Excited to answer any questions you have too. Thank you again for coming, and hoping that this training does you well.
Thanks so much, Ben.
Thank you, Ben.